The cryopod hissed open and Marcus Holt's lungs screamed for air that tasted like rust and decay. His eyes wouldn't focus. His fingers wouldn't move. Emergency lights pulsed red across a cargo bay that shouldn't be silent, shouldn't be empty, shouldn't be drifting through space with hull breaches screaming wind through fractured metal. He rolled from the pod and vomited ice crystals onto decking slick with frozen condensation. The Persephone was dead. 23 crew. The distress beacon should have been screaming. Instead, Marcus heard only his own breathing and the groan of a ship tearing itself apart one bulkhead at a time. His cryosuit display showed 72 hours since breach, 72 hours floating in contested space where salvage rights meant less than target practice. He stumbled toward the bridge, legs barely responding, and found Captain Rivera still strapped in her chair with a hole through her chest the size of a fist. Clean. Precise. Not debris damage. The console flickered with power from emergency cells. Marcus pulled up the last log entry with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Rivera's voice crackled through failing speakers. Unknown vessel decloaking. Config matches Jacari hunting frigate. They're hailing, they want static, then weapons fire. The Jacari didn't take prisoners. They barely acknowledged other species as sentient. Humanity had been mapping their territory for 6 months, keeping to dead zones and forgotten sectors, trying to understand an empire that communicated through pheromones and treated words like a disease. The Persephone must have crossed some invisible line. Marcus checked the armory. Empty. Life pods. Launched. They'd evacuated everyone who could move while he was frozen in emergency cryo after the engine room accident. They'd left him because moving him would have killed him. Protocol said abandon the injured when survival meant seconds. He should have been angry. Instead, he felt nothing but the cold certainty that he was already dead. The ship lurched. Gravity flickered. Marcus grabbed a support beam as something massive connected with the Persephone's starboard hull. Not weapons. A docking clamp. They were being boarded. He had no weapons. No plan. No way to fight creatures that stood 8 feet tall with exoskeletons that shrugged off small arms fire. But he'd spent 6 years in the Corps before joining the mapping service, and the Corps had taught him that you didn't need to win. You just needed to make the enemy regret finding you. Marcus moved through the ship like a ghost, using manual overrides to seal sections and reroute emergency power. He found 3 intact plasma torches in engineering and a case of industrial adhesive that could bond molecular structures in seconds. Not weapons. Tools. But tools could kill if you stopped thinking about regulations and started thinking about anatomy. The Jacari came through the airlock in formation. 3 warriors in chitinous armor that gleamed like black glass under emergency lighting. They moved with absolute confidence, clicking mandibles in patterns Marcus's translator couldn't process. They weren't searching, they were collecting. Probably cataloging the ship for salvage value. He waited in the environmental control room. Plasma torch hot enough to cut steel, adhesive canisters rigged to explosive decompression charges he'd pulled from damaged sections. When the first warrior passed beneath the ventilation shaft, Marcus dropped a canister that ruptured against its thorax and sprayed bonding agent across joints and respiratory spiracles. The Jacari shrieked, not words, pure animal rage. It clawed at the hardening foam as Marcus dropped through the shaft with the plasma torch extended and drove superheated metal into the gap between head and thorax. Chitin cracked. The creature collapsed. The other 2 responded instantly. Marcus barely rolled away from claws that tore through deck plating. He triggered the decompression charge and the room exploded into vacuum. Emergency bulkheads slammed down. The warriors were trapped on the other side, pounding against reinforced steel with impacts that sounded like artillery. Marcus stood in the sealed corridor, breathing hard, knowing he'd just killed himself. The Jacari would cut through eventually, or they'd just detach and let him suffocate when life support failed. He'd bought himself minutes, maybe an hour. The ship's computer chimed. Incoming transmission. Marcus almost ignored it. Then he saw the origin signature. Jacari command vessel. Not the frigate. He accepted. The view screen filled with a face that shouldn't exist. Jacari queens never left their nests. They commanded through pheromone networks that spanned star systems. They were myth and biology textbook diagrams, not living creatures on bridge displays. But she was real. Twice the size of the warriors. With a crest that pulsed with colors Marcus had no names for. Her eyes were compound but somehow focused. Aware. Intelligent in ways the warriors would never be. She watched him. Just watched. And Marcus realized he'd done something impossible. He'd made the Jacari curious, The warriors stopped pounding on the bulkhead. Silence filled the Persephone like a held breath. The queen's mandibles moved in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, almost linguistic. Then her translator activated, and a voice like grinding stones filled the bridge.
You are damaged. Alone.
You should submit. Marcus met those alien eyes through the screen. I should be dead, but I'm not, and every second I stay alive costs you warriors. The queen's crest flared violet. You cannot win. Winning isn't the point. Marcus kept his voice level. The point is making you understand that humans don't surrender just because the math says we should. Rivera's last moments. The crew evacuation. His own medical files showing injuries that should have killed him 3 times over. You want this ship? You'll get it. But you'll understand what it cost first. The transmission ended. Marcus waited for the cutting torches, the final breach. The end that protocol said he'd earned 72 hours ago. Instead, the docking clamps released. The Shikari frigate pulled away from the Persephone and accelerated into the dark. The Queen's vessel followed, massive and ancient, its hull covered in markings Marcus couldn't read. They left him alive. But they left him. Marcus collapsed against the console and started laughing, the sound raw and broken in the empty bridge. He'd broken every rule, fought when fighting was suicide, spoken when silence was survival, made demands when he had nothing to bargain with. And somehow, impossibly, the Shikari had blinked first. The Persephone's beacon finally activated, its automated systems recognizing stable enough conditions to call for help. Marcus watched the signal pulse into the void and thought about Captain Rivera, about the crew in their escape pods, about the core instructors who'd told him that humans survived because they knew when to quit. They'd been wrong. Humans survived because sometimes, when death was certain and hope was gone, someone would close their eyes and choose to fight anyway. Choose to make the universe remember that humanity had been here, had mattered, had refused to go quietly into whatever darkness waited. Marcus didn't know if rescue would come in time. Didn't know if the Queen would return with a fleet. Didn't know if his cryo-damaged brain was processing reality correctly anymore. But he knew the Shikari would remember the human who should have died and didn't, who killed a warrior with tools and stubbornness, who made a queen watch and wonder if maybe these fragile creatures were more dangerous than anyone had calculated. The emergency lights pulsed steady. The beacon sang. And Marcus Holt, left for dead in the dark between stars, allowed himself to believe that sometimes breaking every rule was the only protocol that mattered. 3 weeks later, the rescue ship Valkyrie found the Persephone drifting in neutral space with one survivor aboard who shouldn't have lasted 3 days. They found the dead Shikari warrior in environmental control, its chitin still fused with industrial adhesive. They found the blast marks in the sealed bulkheads and the evidence of a stand that defied every tactical assessment humanity had ever made about fighting the Shikari. Commander Sarah Chen stood in the cargo bay while medics worked on Marcus, stabilizing systems that had been cannibalizing themselves to keep his brain alive. She reviewed the logs 3 times before she believed them. Then she contacted Fleet Command with a message that would change humanity's approach to Shikari relations forever. "We've been negotiating from fear," she transmitted, assuming their warrior culture meant they only respected strength. "We were wrong. They respect defiance. They respect the refusal to accept inevitability. Marcus Holt was one man with no weapons and no chance, and he made them leave. We need to reconsider everything." But 6 days later, a Jekari diplomatic vessel appeared at the frontier station humanity had been trying to establish for months. They transmitted in broken human languages, pheromone patterns translated through algorithms nobody trusted, requesting formal contact protocols. They wanted to understand the species that produced individuals like Marcus Holt. Wanted to know if all humans possessed this irrational commitment to survival. Wanted to establish boundaries before more incidents forced conflict neither side wanted. Marcus woke up 2 weeks into recovery with his body finally accepting the cybernetic implants replacing systems his cryo damage had destroyed. Commander Chen sat beside his medbay bed, her expression unreadable. "You started a diplomatic incident," she said. Marcus tried to laugh, but his ribs wouldn't cooperate. "I was just trying to stay alive." "You killed a Shikari warrior with a plasma torch and construction adhesive. Then you lectured a queen about human stubbornness." "Do you understand how insane that sounds? I was already dead. What did I have to lose?" That's exactly what they want to understand. The Shikari calculate risk and survival probability for every action. Their warriors follow protocols that have evolved over thousands of years. When you acted against every logical survival strategy, you did something their entire culture considers impossible. You made them uncertain. What happens now? Now humanity has a seat at negotiation tables we've been excluded from, because the Shikari saw what one determined human could do and decided they'd rather talk than find out what 1,000,000 of you might accomplish. Chen stood. Fleet wants you debriefed. The diplomatic corps wants you consulted. And the Shikari specifically requested confirmation that you survived. They have questions. I have questions too. Like, why did the queen leave? She could have waited 10 minutes and collected her warrior's body. Finished the job. Chen pulled up a translation file on her datapad. This came through yesterday. Best our linguists can manage with Shikari pheromone language, she read slowly. You demonstrated nest defense behavior without nest. Warrior commitment without swarm support. Individual agency superseding colony protocol. These variables require analysis before further contact. In other words, you scared them. Marcus absorbed that impossibility. He'd been one broken human on a dead ship. The Shikari were an empire that spanned 40 star systems. Fear shouldn't have entered the equation. They respected you, Chen continued. Not your strength. Your refusal. Your complete disregard for calculated outcomes. To them, that's either profound courage or clinical insanity, and they're not sure which terrifies them more. The medbay door opened. A young ensign stood at attention. Commander, the diplomatic team is requesting Specialist Holt's presence for preliminary consultation. The Shikari have questions about human decision-making under terminal circumstances. Marcus looked at Chen. I'm still recovering. But, Marcus, eventually you'll need to face them. The Queen specifically. She's demanded formal introduction. Demanded?
They don't expose themselves to potential threats.
But she's coming to the frontier station. For you? Chen's expression shifted to something like awe. You've become culturally significant to them, a case study. Maybe a warning they give their warriors about underestimating prey species. Marcus thought about those final moments on the Persephone, the Queen's eyes through the view screen, the absolute silence after he'd transmitted his defiance. I wasn't trying to be significant. I was just angry that they killed my crew, that they treated us like we didn't matter. Why anger would override survival instinct? Their warriors die for the colony without hesitation, but it's biological imperative, not choice. You chose to fight knowing you'd lose. That's alien to them, literally. Recovery took another month. Marcus spent it reviewing everything humanity knew about the Shikari, which amounted to speculation and autopsies of the few warriors ever recovered. They were eusocial, like Earth's ants and bees, but with intelligence concentrated in queens and sub-queens, who commanded through pheromone networks. Warriors were extensions of collective will, not individuals. Except the warrior Marcus killed had been alone, separated from the network, operating on standing protocols without real-time guidance, and it had died because those protocols hadn't accounted for prey that fought with tools and desperation instead of claws and venom. The Shikari had learned their warriors were vulnerable in ways their empire had never considered, and that made humanity dangerous beyond their population or technology level. The frontier station was a ring of habitats orbiting a dead moon when Marcus arrived. The Valkyrie docked at the diplomatic section where atmosphere processors worked overtime to create neutral zones neither species found comfortable but both could tolerate. Commander Chen escorted him through security that checked for everything from weapons to pheromone markers that Shikari might interpret as aggression. Protocol is simple, she briefed. Maintain distance, don't make sudden movements. Their translator AI will handle language. Most importantly, don't lie. They can't detect human deception biologically, but their queens are intelligent enough to read behavioral patterns we're still mapping. His cybernetic enhancements made him stronger than before the Persephone, faster in some ways, but they also marked him as permanently altered by his choices. The Shikari would see that. Understand that humans rebuilt themselves after damage that should kill them. The meeting chamber was vast, built to accommodate a queen who stood 12 feet tall with a thorax as wide as a cargo pod. She waited at the chamber's center, surrounded by warriors who remained absolutely still. Perfect discipline. Perfect protocol. The queen's crest shifted through colors that hurt Marcus's eyes. Her mandibles moved in patterns that seemed almost musical before the translator converted them to grinding mechanical speech.
You are Marcus Holt.
Survivor of the Persephone. Killer of warrior designation Jatalric. Marcus stopped at the designated distance marker. Yes, you should have died. Medical analysis indicates 97.3% mortality probability from initial injuries, 99.8% from subsequent engagement. You violated survival mathematics. I didn't run the numbers. I just acted. The Queen's eyes reflected light in ways that suggested she was processing multiple visual spectrums simultaneously. Explain action selection. You possess no viable path to survival. Optimal behavior demanded surrender or concealment. You chose confrontation. Why? Marcus considered his answer carefully. Because your warriors killed my crew. Because surrendering wouldn't have saved me. Because if I was going to die anyway, I wanted to die making you understand that humans don't disappear quietly. Emotional response. Not tactical calculation. Yes. The Queen's crest flared violet, the same color she displayed on the view screen. This is what we do not understand. Emotion compromises optimal decision pathways, yet your species demonstrates technological advancement comparable to our own. You should not survive your own irrationality.
Chen stepped forward slightly.
May I speak, honored Queen? The translator paused, then, because of our irrationality. Not in spite of it. We take risks your protocols would forbid. We form attachments that make us vulnerable. We fight for abstract concepts like dignity and memory. These things seem inefficient until they produce individuals like Marcus Holt who should die but don't. You defend his actions. I celebrate them. He represented humanity at its most fundamental, adaptable, unwilling to accept that mathematics determines fate. Several warriors shifted position. Marcus recognized it as communication, subtle pheromone exchanges he couldn't interpret. The Queen remained still for long seconds before speaking again. We have observed human expansion, monitored your probe vessels, calculated threat potential as minimal based on technological parity and population constraints. These calculations assumed rational actors following optimal survival protocols. Her crest darkened. Marcus Holt indicates our calculations were insufficient. I'm one person, Marcus said.
An outlier. Analysis of human military history indicates recurrent pattern.
Individuals and small groups demonstrating catastrophic commitment despite overwhelming opposition. Thermopylae.
Baston. Firebase Gloria.
Incidents where survival probability approached zero, yet humans continued combat operations. This suggests systemic behavioral pattern, not individual aberration. Marcus hadn't expected the Jikari to know human history. The revelation that they'd been studying humanity's wars, learning the patterns of desperate last stands, sent cold certainty down his spine. The Jikari weren't just curious. They were evaluating humanity as a potential threat. We fight when we have to, he said carefully. We also negotiate, trade, form alliances.
We're not defined by our worst moments.
That is sufficient for recalculation. The Queen moved forward, massive and graceful, stopping just outside what Chen had designated as minimum safe distance. You killed Jatalrik with industrial tools, improvised weapons from civilian equipment. This indicates capacity for violent adaptation under resource constraint. Your survival indicates enhanced resilience beyond biological baseline. You represent variable our empire must integrate into future projections. What kind of projections? The Queen's mandibles moved in a pattern the translator rendered as contemplative pause. Humanity will expand. This is inevitable given your demographic patterns and resource requirements. Expansion will intersect Jackery territorial interests. Conflict or cooperation will result. Prior to encountering you, our calculations suggested conflict would resolve favorably. Now calculations are uncertain. Ten tensed beside him. This is why the diplomatic corps had wanted Marcus here. The Jikari were deciding whether humanity was worth destroying before they became unstoppable. Marcus chose his words carefully. I killed one warrior defending myself. That doesn't make humanity a threat to your empire. Correct. Makes humanity unpredictable. Warriors follow protocols. Queens direct through optimized pheromone commands. Humans follow emotion and individual judgment. We cannot calculate you, cannot predict when you will choose death over surrender, cannot determine which humans possess Marcus Holt capacity for terminal defiance. She leaned closer, her size suddenly overwhelming. Marcus forced himself to remain still even as every instinct screamed to retreat. So we must choose. Eliminate uncertainty through preemptive action, or accept uncertainty as variable and adapt protocols. The chamber fell silent. Warriors stood frozen. Chen had stopped breathing. Everything humanity hoped to accomplish in this sector hung on whatever came next. Marcus met the Queen's compound eyes. If you choose elimination, you'll win. Humanity doesn't have the numbers or the technology to fight your empire, but you'll learn exactly how costly we can make victory. Every ship, every colony, every human you encounter will remember the Persephone, will remember that one broken human made you uncertain, and they'll make you pay for every meter of space you claim. Threat? You studied our military history. You know we remember our defeats longer than our victories. Know we build monuments to last stands and impossible odds. You attack us, and we'll become your forever war, the species that never stops, never surrenders, never forgets. The Queen's crest cycled through colors Marcus had no context for. Then she backed away, returning to the chamber's center. Her warriors shifted formation, creating an opening. Marcus Holt, you have provided valuable data. The Jakari Collective will integrate human irrationality into future calculations. We will not seek elimination. Cost-benefit analysis suggests coexistence offers superior outcomes despite uncertainty. She paused. But we will remember you. The human who violated mathematics and survived, who transformed tactical defeat into strategic victory through refusal to accept outcome probability. Chen exhaled slowly. The collective is willing to negotiate formal protocols? Affirmative. Humanity has demonstrated capacity for both violence and restraint. Marcus Holt killed Cetalric but did not desecrate remains. Transmitted defiance but offered understanding. These variables suggest potential for protocol alignment. The Queen's attention returned to Marcus. You will participate in negotiations. Your presence reminds both species what miscalculation costs. Marcus nodded slowly. I'll help however I can. Limited, uncertain, but sufficient for beginning. The Queen turned toward her warriors. This audience concludes, Marcus Holt may retain knowledge that he altered empire calculations. Few individuals achieve such significance. The warriors formed escort positions, and the Queen moved toward the chamber's far exit, her movements powerful and precise. She paused at the threshold. One final question. When you closed your eyes on the Persephone waiting for death, what did you think? Marcus considered lying, offering something noble or profound. Instead, he told the truth. I thought about my crew, about how they didn't deserve to die for mapping empty space. I thought about how angry I was that you'd killed them and I couldn't do anything about it. Then I decided that wasn't acceptable, so I opened my eyes and made it your problem too. The Queen's crest flared bright violet one last time. This is why humans terrify us. You transform personal grief into tactical action, individual emotion into collective threat. We calculate probabilities. You create new variables through sheer refusal to accept them. She paused. Do not close your eyes again, Marcus Holt. Your species needs witnesses who understand what you are capable of becoming. Then she was gone, warriors flowing after her like water following predetermined channels. The chamber fell quiet except for air processors working to purge Jakari pheromones before they overwhelmed human olfactory systems. Jen sat down heavily. You just saved humanity from a war we would have lost. I just told the truth. Marcus looked at his hands, at the cybernetic enhancements that let him grip things with precision that should have been impossible after his injuries. The Jakari calculate everything, optimize every decision, but they can't calculate spite. Can't account for the human who decides that making the enemy regret their choices matters more than surviving. That's not spite. That's courage. Or maybe it's just refusing to let the universe tell us when we're done. Marcus stood. What happens now? Now we negotiate. Territory rights. Trade protocols. Military engagement parameters. All the boring infrastructure of peace. Jen managed a tired smile. And you become the face of humanity's diplomatic corps. The man who made the Jakari blink. Marcus thought about the Persephone drifting in the dark. About Rivera and the crew who'd followed protocol and died anyway. About the warrior he'd killed with tools and desperation. I'm not a diplomat. No, but you're proof that humans are worth the trouble of understanding. That will surprise you even when the math says we're finished. The Jakari respect that. Fear it, maybe, but respect it enough to try cooperation before extinction. The weeks that followed were dense with negotiation, translation errors, and careful protocol establishment. Marcus attended sessions where every word was analyzed for implications neither species fully understood. He learned that Jakari queens thought in probability clouds, rather than binary outcomes, that their warriors were individuals, but subordinated individuality to collective optimization. that their empire had encountered dozens of species and absorbed or eliminated them based on calculated threat assessment. Haza humanity had passed assessment. Barely. Because one angry human on a dying ship had demonstrated that humans would burn the galaxy down rather than submit to mathematics. The formal treaty took 6 months to finalize. Territory boundaries, trade lanes, scientific exchange. Military non-aggression with carefully worded exceptions. Both sides knew it was temporary, knew that eventually expansion or resource competition would force renegotiation, but it bought time. Space to learn whether cooperation might optimize better than conflict. Marcus stood in the observation deck of the newly completed diplomatic station, watching Jacari vessels glide past human ships with careful distance. The Queen had returned to her nest world. Her warriors had withdrawn to border patrols that mirrored humanity's own deployments, and somehow, impossibly, 2 species that should have destroyed each other were learning to share the same space. Chen joined him at the viewport. Fleet Command wants you to train tactical response teams. Teach them improvised combat protocols based on your Persephone experience. Quote, I got lucky. The warrior was alone, disconnected from the network. That won't happen in actual combat. But you proved humans can kill them, that we're not defenseless even against superior biology. That matters for morale. She handed him a datapad. Also, the Jacari sent this. It took 3 weeks to translate properly. Marcus scanned the message. It was from the Queen, her pheromone language converted through algorithms into something approximating human concepts. The core message was simple. Jatalric's genetic legacy has been honored. Its death served colony by preventing greater conflict. Marcus Holt's actions were optimal within human behavioral framework. We acknowledge respect? They honored the warrior I killed? Zakari don't mourn like we do. But they integrate every loss into collective memory. Stalrig died alone doing its duty. The Queen ensured its sacrifice mattered. Chen pointed to a line near the end. This part is interesting. They're requesting human advisors for warrior training. Want us to teach improvisation and individual decision-making skills. Marcus read the section twice. The Shikari were adapting. Learning from humanity the same way humanity learned from them. It was terrifying and hopeful in equal measure. Will we send advisors? If you recommend it. You're the expert on human Zakari combat dynamics. Chen smiled slightly. Welcome to politics, Specialist Holt, where your actions have consequences that echo across star systems. Marcus thought about the young ensign version of himself who'd joined the mapping service to see the stars, who'd never imagined killing aliens with construction tools or lecturing queens about human stubbornness, who just wanted to be useful in the quiet ways that didn't require medals or recognition. That person had died on the Persephone along with Rivera and the rest. What remained was someone harder, less willing to accept that any situation was truly hopeless. I'll train the teams, he said. And I'll recommend we send advisors to the Jacari, but on one condition. Name it. Every human who trains with them needs to understand what they're really learning, not just tactics, not just biology. They need to understand that the Jacari are watching us, calculating whether we're worth keeping alive. And every interaction is a chance to prove that humanity is more than our math suggests. Chen nodded slowly. You really think they might change their mind? Decide we're too dangerous after all? I think they're still uncertain, still trying to reconcile what they observe with what their protocols say should be possible. We're the variable they can't eliminate from their equations. Marcus turned from the viewport. So we need to make sure that variable always suggests cooperation, offers better outcomes than extinction, even when we're angry, even when we're scared, even when every instinct says to close our eyes and wait for the end. Instead, we open them and fight. Instead, we open them and make the universe deal with us. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The Zankari wanted to understand human irrationality. Let's teach them that sometimes the most irrational thing is refusing to give up hope. 6 months later, Marcus watched the first joint human Zakari patrol depart from the frontier station. Warriors and Marines moving in coordinated formation, each species learning the other's protocols while maintaining their own identity. It shouldn't have worked. Every cultural analysis said the differences were too fundamental, the history too short, the trust too fragile. But it was working, because neither side wanted another Persephone. Another moment where miscalculation and violence produced outcomes that served no one. The Queen had sent a final message before withdrawing to her nest world. Marcus kept it on his personal datapad, reviewing it when diplomatic tensions flared or when negotiations stalled over incompatible biology. You closed your eyes expecting death. Instead, you demonstrated that humans redefine variables through will alone. This is illogical, inefficient, impossible by our calculations. It is also why your species will endure. We cannot eliminate you without learning from you, cannot understand you without accepting uncertainty. You have taught the Shikari that some variables cannot be optimized away, only integrated. For this knowledge, the collective acknowledges debt. Marcus had never responded. What could he say that would matter more than what he'd already done? He'd survived when survival was impossible, fought when fighting was suicide, made an empire question its fundamental assumptions about what constituted threat and what constituted value. He'd broken every rule, and somehow in the vast mathematical engine of Jacqueries' strategic planning, his defiance had calculated out to a variable worth preserving. The patrol ships activated their drives and accelerated toward the border zones where both species maintained watchful presence. Human and Jacquari, different in every way that mattered, except one. Both had looked into the void where the other waited and decided that understanding might optimize better than extinction. It was fragile, uncertain, built on one angry human's refusal to die quietly and one curious queen's willingness to recalculate assumptions. But it was enough, for now, for the next crisis. For however long it took for two impossible species to learn whether cooperation was sustainable or just another variable waiting to collapse into inevitable conflict, Marcus closed his eyes, not in surrender, not in despair, in memory of the crew that had launched him toward this improbable future. Then he opened them again and returned to work, training the next generation who would stand at the frontier between mathematics and will, making sure the universe understood that humanity would always refuse to accept the calculations that said they were finished. The Jacquari would watch, would learn, would integrate every new variable into their endless optimization engines. And humanity would keep breaking rules, defying probability, and surviving impossible circumstances through sheer stubborn refusal to disappear. That was the treaty no document could capture. The understanding that couldn't be translated through algorithms or pheromone networks. The knowledge that some species calculated their way through the universe while others simply refused to be calculated at all. Marcus Holt had closed his eyes in a dying ship and opened them as the proof that human irrationality was the most rational force in the galaxy. The variable, the Zachari, could never eliminate. The impossible factor that made cooperation inevitable because the alternative was learning just how costly human spite could become when backed by technology and time. The frontier stations pulsed with activity, trade flowing, knowledge exchanging. Two empires learning to share space that both needed and neither could claim without war. And somewhere in the calculations, the Jacquari Queens process through their optimization networks, Marcus Holt existed as the permanent reminder that some variables couldn't be optimized away, only accepted, integrated. He'd been left for dead. He'd closed his eyes, expecting nothing. Instead, he'd opened them and shown an empire that humanity's greatest strength was the refusal to accept that strength mattered more than will. The universe would remember. The Jacquari would never forget, and humanity would keep surviving impossible circumstances, one stubborn human at a time, until the galaxy learned that some species couldn't be calculated.
Only witness.